Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special webinar. Today, we have the one and only Inga Beale, who is a businesswoman and also the former CEO of Lloyd's of London. We are so happy to have her here with us today, and we're just going to go through some questions to get to know Inga and just her thoughts on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, as well as showing up as your authentic self. So welcome, Inga. It is an honor to even speak to you. So let's get right to it.
Oh, thank you, Amy. And it's a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So tell us about your journey and how it shaped you to be the person that you are today.
Well, my journey started many years ago, as you can probably tell by the color of my hair.
You still look good.
It started a long, long time ago, and now I'm semi-retired. After 40 years of working in the world of insurance. I'm still connected with insurance, but now I sit on boards in a non-executive capacity, so I have a different pace of life. But I started out, as a bit of a rebel, bit of a rebellious teenager, but I so wanted to go to the bright city lights of London. I was brought up in a small town in England, and London to me I didn't really know it, but it just seemed so exciting. And I was so desperate to go to London. So I did actually start a university degree in London. I left home and I lived on my own. It was really exciting, but I didn't really like that very much. I thought I want a job instead. And I ended up getting a job in insurance as a trainee reinsurance underwriter, right in the heart of the London and Lloyd's market, right in the centre of the financial district of London. And I just got transfixed by this industry. And of course, being in reinsurance, we were doing big ticket items, reinsuring insurance companies. So there were lots of big numbers floating around, and I got very excited. And that was 40 years ago. And through the decades, I've had the most amazing opportunities. It's not all gone smooth. The first 10 years of my life, I wasn't really focused on my career particularly. I just wanted to stay working in London so I could, didn't have to sort of return home. And I did a lot of sport. But then later on, I joined a particular company, and they were all about giving opportunities for women and also for ethnic minorities, as they described them in those days. And this was a big US company, and it had a particular description of what an ethnic minority is, because of course, when you go around the world, it can mean all sorts of different things. But they were very focused on also promoting women. And that was when I got my first career break after 12 years. This company proactively went out to promote women. I don't think I would ever have got to the CEO of Lloyd's if that company, it was GE Insurance Solutions. It doesn't own the business anymore, it sold it. But it promoted me as a female. And that's when my career really started to take off. And I had wonderful opportunities to move from London. I moved to the US, I moved to Kansas City.
Oh, wow.
And everybody in London wondered where the hell I was going, But it was a wonderful time, and I learned a lot about the US culture. And I will never, ever, ever take for granted that however many business trips you've had to a country, that you even really begin to understand a culture. Because in my view, until you've actually lived somewhere and worked there, it's only when you really start to understand a little bit about the culture. So that was my experience in the US for a few years. Then I went to Paris in France, and then I went to Munich in Germany. So I had wonderful career opportunities. And then I left GE at the time they sold the business, and I moved to Zurich in Switzerland. And that was a big step for me, because that was the first real CEO job. And when I say real CEO job, prior to that, I was running a massive division. This was me running a publicly listed reinsurance company. So I was the real CEO, and it was an amazing learning experience. Unfortunately, we were taken over by a bigger company, so that came to an end. And then I stayed in Switzerland working for the Zurich Insurance until I came sort of back full circle to London. And in 2014, started as the CEO of Lloyd's of London. And so that's it. Lots of variety in my life, lots of different types of business, reinsurance, insurance, auto insurance, property insurance, life insurance, all spectrums of insurance coverage. And it's been very, very rewarding and very fulfilling.
You have definitely had an amazing career. Definitely. You've gone everywhere. So that is awesome. And I just love it. Like, I love everything that you said about just the different areas you've been to, and just like the diversity within your actual career. It's been awesome. And it's also awesome that your first position was definitely more towards empowering women. That's really good. So my next question for you, what were some of your biggest challenges that you faced throughout your career, and how did you handle those challenges?
I've had many, really almost too many, but
okay.
I think what I'll do, because I know we want to get through a lot of topics here, I'm just going to focus on two, actually. I'm going to focus on one, which was quite a personal thing, and then another thing, which was a real professional challenge. Mm-hmm. So one was about that first promotion I mentioned that I got after I'd been working for 12 years. I'd never managed one person up until then, so I wasn't a high potential. I didn't start my career rapidly. I actually said no when they first offered me promotion because I was too scared. I was so unconfident. And I said no to this promotion. The thought of sort of moving up to the same level as my boss, who was a man, him moving off to the side, me then being a peer of his, I said, I can't do that. So I actually said no. But because GE had such structured talent management and they wanted to promote women, they basically supported me. And my boss in London reached out to the Home Office in the US, and I need some help. She said, no, what do I do? And they basically came to me, a senior woman came over from the US, spoke to me, asked me what I needed. And I was surrounded by support. I went on a training course for assertiveness for women. But to be honest, that was a massive challenge, this overcoming my own glass ceiling. I'd kind of put my own glass ceiling on top of me. I'd said no. And this woman explained to me, she said, but we believe in you. The company believes in you. Why can't you believe in yourself? So that was a big challenge. And I've had a few, it hasn't all been plain sailing. So I've also had some sort of doubts about myself and my identity, whether I should be in this role or not. But now I lean on other people. I lean on mentors. And I've lent on some really fantastic networks I've built up. So I've kind of got to deal with it okay. But the professional challenge was really the one I took on at Lloyd's, which was inheriting or taking over a CEO of a 325-year-old institution. It can be only described as that. And trying to digitalize it, bring it into the 21st century. From the practices that have been going on for 3 centuries, from 1688 when it was first formed. And that to me was the huge professional challenge. But the richness of that experience, the learnings about how to include people, and the understanding I got about how well diverse teams can forge for the future, that was an incredible learning. So although it was a huge challenge and completely exhausting and draining, I learned so much about it, and it enriched me as a human being.
That is so awesome. That is great. And I love the fact that you spoke on, the richness of having a diverse team and what it brings, which brings me to my next question. Who or what inspired you to live as your authentic self? You said earlier, you had a group of women who supported you, but what really just went beyond those women? What made you decide to just be Inga Beale? And how did you deal with any negative feedback that may have come with it?
Well, the first time that happened was actually, I left the City of London in a real rage because of a sexist incident in the office, in the workplace. And I walked out and didn't say anything. I just walked out. I was so mad. And I went traveling for a year on my own, just backpacking around the world. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself, but I was also inspired by a female role model I came across, not in the insurance world, but she worked for the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC in Sydney, Australia. And I ended up working for her for a bit, and she was the boss. And I'd never seen a female sort of running an office before where I had come from, the world of insurance. So she was truly inspirational for me, and she made me rethink myself. And the interesting thing was, Lloyd's had only just opened up to women in the decade before, in the 70s.
wow.
I started working in the 80s. So, you know, there weren't that many senior women, but also there was a strict dress code in those days that women had to go into the office either wearing skirts or a dress. You know, they couldn't wear pants or trousers. They had to go in a certain way. She wore a pantsuit to the office. And I said, whoa, these women can really do things, can't they? And so she inspired me to kind of go back and just be a bit more like me and not try to conform to a certain required behavior. Mm-hmm. And so she was a real inspiration to me. And that was my sort of first step into being more authentic. But then I actually went into the closet because I then started dating women. And I'd been regarding myself as a sort of heterosexual woman fighting in a man's world up until that time. Come back to London, I start dating women. So I go into this other phase where suddenly I'm keeping secret another entire part of my life. There was no way I had the courage to be out about that.
Right.
And that didn't happen for many years later. And I went to the US in secret. I went to France in secret, Germany in secret. And it wasn't actually until this takeover occurred, and it was a hostile takeover in Switzerland. I ended up leaving because they didn't need two CEOs. And my assistant took me out for dinner on a Saturday night. She assumed I was on my own because everyone thought I was on my own. I wasn't. I didn't know about they didn't know about my partner. And she said to me, "I don't know how you managed, Inga. I don't know how you had the strength to carry on when you had no one at home to support you." And at that moment, that was it. I said, "This is awful. Not only have I been lying to all these people, in a way lying, not overtly lying, but because I haven't spoken, sort of been lying. Now they're almost feeling sorry for me when I've actually had the most loving, gorgeous woman at home looking after me." And that was the moment at that dinner. I said to myself, I'm going to now be out. And for the very next interview I went for, I was interviewed by the group CEO. I mentioned that I was in a relationship with a woman. He hardly batted an eyelid and said, "Oh, that's great. I hope I get to meet her one day." I got the job, and that was it. And sort of all those years of angst and worry. And I thought, gosh, why wasn't I just out and myself at work all that time? And that's what happened. And I did have a little blip actually when I started at Lloyd's in 2014, because after many, many years, my female partner, she left me after many years, and I then ended up back with a man again. So then I got another label, bisexual.
Right.
I didn't go around looking for these labels, but this is life, right? We're human. Right. Things happen. We are interesting people. I ended up being back with a man. And then I started at Lloyd's, and then the media wanted to know all about my sexuality. And then I sort of went back in the closet because I said, I can't cope with this because I'm taking over as the first female CEO. I've got this enormous challenge, this wall of resistance to any change. I need them to start respecting me as a leader. I've got to try and get my gender out off the table. I do not need anything else talked about. So I kind of went back into the closet for a little bit, believe it or not. I didn't talk about it openly.
Oh, wow.
Then I realized how the situation was a lot of the time in the world of insurance that there was homophobia going on and unpleasant behaviors. And then I said, I've got to be outspoken. I've got to use my position of influence to try and get to a better, more respectful, equal world.
I love that. It's something about being your authentic self. And I totally get it when you were saying, like keeping that secret, but at the same time, you're lying to yourself, but you're inadvertently lying to others as well. So with that being said and being your authentic self, how can the industry in general kind of encourage others to be their authentic selves? Because you see it now, people come suited and booted, they come to work and they kind of conform to what the culture is at work without really being who they are, because either they're afraid or they just feel that, I just come to work and I want to keep my personal life separate. Like, how can we bring ourselves to the professional workforce, and how can the industry encourage others to be their authentic selves.
And there are people who will choose not to bring certain aspects of themselves to work.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to also respect that. But I would suggest that actually it's much more fulfilling and healthy if you can be your authentic self at work. Because every time you're not, you're wasting energy on hiding something. You're constantly, your mind will be working on, I mustn't say anything about that, or
right.
you're caring for somebody at home. I mean, it could be anything that you feel could have a potential detrimental effect on your career because somebody might judge you. But it's hindering you all the time. And employers should see this just as much as employees. And they should say, actually, I want you to be authentic, because I know that if you're not wasting energy or feeling in any way disengaged because of something outside of work that's maybe distracting you or making your brain sort of disconnect part of it because it's worried about saying something about that. Employers will want people to bring their whole selves to work. So you're more engaged, more productive, more involved, because it's when you're involved and engaged that productivity rises, you get more creative, you come up with new solutions, teamwork is better, and actually work is more enjoyable. And we do so many hours of work in our life, we should be able to enjoy it. And the success of the team, and when you really have a diverse team, and it really buzzes, that's when you do amazing things. And that's all about other people being curious, not judging people just because they're different, they look different to us, really being curious about other people. And I do know that some people will say that there are some topics that are absolutely taboo. I remember when I started at Lloyd's, I used to write a weekly blog that I shared with everyone. And it was my own words. It wasn't a corporate communications delivered piece. I just wrote about my reflections as I was the CEO, what I was learning and seeing and things like that. And I was only going to do it for my first 100 days, but actually I ended up doing it for nearly the entire 5 years I was there. Not every week, it got a bit less frequent. But it started to open up the whole culture, and we had more people blogging about things. And I can remember one year, I think it was only the second year I was there, a guy blogged about Ramadan. And then he got more likes and comments and things than I did on mine. So I thought, this is amazing. So I went up to found him. He probably was wondering why on earth the CEO was coming up to his desk. I went and found him. And I said, congratulations, well done, that's fantastic. You started a real conversation about Ramadan, about religion and things. And he said, well, first of all, he was blown away, couldn't believe it. But the other thing was, he said, I came to Lloyd's because of the talk about, diversity, equity, inclusion. I came here for that reason, because my previous employer didn't allow me to talk about my religion at all. Because most places, they want this, they don't want any conflict, they don't want any difficulty, not like to talk about this stuff. I was encouraging people, and it was such a positive thing because people were really curious. They wanted to know, and he'd opened the door for them to ask perhaps questions that they might have felt dumb asking, but he allowed them to do it. And I think that's what organizations can do to just sort of help people and actually see the benefit that if you have these open, honest conversations and you allow people to ask when they don't know, but it's not about conflict, it's not about being aggressive, it's not that, it's actually curiosity. And that to me is, I'm a very curious person about people, and that to me is a really important aspect of a culture.
I love how you said, when you're not your authentic self, it's the energy that you're wasting. So even with that energy, that one may be wasting, in a way, it could affect their mental health in a way, because it's like they're one person for 8 to 12 hours a day, and then, it's exhausting, and then they get in the car or however they get home. How can the industry aid in just the mental health aspect of those who fall under minority or marginalized populations?
Yeah, well, it is all about giving safe spaces to have conversations. And I think it's an absolutely fascinating topic, because actually it's amazing. So in the UK, suicide is the largest killer of the male population under 45 years old. Now, this is startling because it's mental health issues. mental health issues that actually a massive part of our population, not a minority, don't want to talk about. And I remember on International Men's Day, hosting an event just for men to talk about mental health issues. 70% of the audience were still women. I couldn't even get the men to come. So it's not just about trying to encourage people from certain groups who might feel in the minority to talk. Actually, some of these topics, particularly around mental health, affect a lot of people. And we've got to encourage them to think it's actually okay to talk about it. The way we won that one was we found someone who had nearly, or tried to commit suicide, so had nearly taken his own life. He did come out about that to his employer supported him. He then recorded a video and we just put it out there, and other people watched this video, this sort of brave soul who was out there being a role model, and that opened up the doors for other people to have conversations about mental health. And I think particularly when you start having these conversations, it's nice if you can have a group of like-minded people. Now, we know that to crack the code of this, getting this topic right, we've got to have all sorts of different people talking to each other. But when you're starting out on this journey, perhaps exploring what you can talk about, sometimes it's best to have a small, safe group, often of like-minded people who've got exactly the same experience. And so sometimes even I like to go to my women's group. It's very safe and I feel I can talk about anything. A lot of the time, I'm not just talking to women. Sometimes I might want to talk to the LGBTQ+ community, just because I'm talking about things that relate to them. And that, to me, is how we encourage people to start talking about these difficulties and these issues. And usually you find that someone in a group has exactly the same experience, the same feeling. Yes. And we learn from each other about how to even ask about someone's mental health, because this is it's not an easy thing. And as an employer, it's absolutely paramount that you show support. So important that you show support, because most people are fearful that if they show which they regard as a weakness, there will be a detrimental impact on them. And this is what we must stop.
Definitely. And support is definitely the key. And, like you said, starting off, in a safe space. Safe spaces are so needed for someone who comes from the world of academia. That was something that a lot of the institutions that I worked with wanted to do, create these small safe spaces for the students to feel like they belong. So with belonging, that is such a huge topic in the DEI world, because, we can have diversity, we can have equity, and we can have inclusion. But the question is, do these populations feel that sense of belonging? So how can the industry or individuals be better allies to marginalized populations without being seen as performative when it comes to gaining that, belonging? And I know a lot of people say sense of belonging. And I, as someone who's minority, I don't want that sense of belonging. I want to feel like I belong. So how can the industry or individuals just be better allies with that?
And it's not just going to happen overnight. We all know this. This takes a real concerted effort. And it's every level of an organization. So I think at the very top, you have got to genuinely want this to happen. You've genuinely got to want everybody to respect different people and make people feel they're being valued and listened to, and they're involved in designing their own future, involved in change and all of this. And that's when you really feel that you're belonging, and you belong, and you're part of the team, and you're a valued member of the team. That has to start from the top, and it's got to be genuine. No longer can CEOs do corporate blah blah about this. People can see through in a moment, and with social media, messages can get out. I mean, the pressure on CEOs these days is pretty severe, right? You're being scored in the social media world, without you even knowing about it sometimes. So you've got to genuinely mean it. And I would suggest that the way you genuinely make yourself be able to speak authentically about this is to think of a time when you didn't belong. Think of a time when you were not part of a group, or you didn't feel you were part of a group. And for me, actually, it started at a very young age. And it was actually because I was one of 3 children I was a middle child, but I was born with dark brown hair, and my two siblings were born with white blonde hair. And they told me I was adopted. And they became buddies and played with each other, whereas I felt completely that I didn't belong. So this belonging can manifest itself in all sorts of ways. The color of your hair, your height. I mean, all sorts of things. Not, it's not just about your gender, the color of your skin, your sexuality, not just that. And so I would suggest that anyone who doesn't know how to speak about this authentically, think of a time when you felt you didn't belong. Think how that felt. Share that experience with others so that people can understand that actually you can get a feeling, even if it's not as extreme as for others. Just think about it. There will be a time when you felt you didn't belong somewhere, and just try and remember and portray to others that you know how that feels. And that can then happen down all the rest of the organization. And it's incumbent upon all of us, every single one of us actually, to be part of this. We can't just leave it to some leaders or somebody over there or your employee resource group or your DI leader. It's not about that. It's almost incumbent upon every single one of us to reach out to somebody, buddy up with someone who's very different to you, start conversations, be interested, call out inappropriate behaviors, all of this sort of stuff. And it can happen in every meeting, every situation, every discussion on Zoom or Teams or corridors or, all the time. Be just that, have that reflection and catch yourself, because by having conversations, particularly with people who are different to you, you will start to all feel that you actually belong to this higher, sort of bigger being that's actually made up of all these different people.
I love that. Definitely have that conversation and reach out to those who don't look like you. And I can definitely attest that it is probably one of the best things I have ever done, to seek out people who I know are nothing like me, but you learn so much, and you learn the similarities that you have. And it's always mind-boggling to me. But so you mentioned earlier, how, being that person who was kind of in the closet, and then you came out, and then you went back in. With that and any negativity that you faced, how did you ensure that your voice was still heard, but also those that, who were under you, you may have seen or felt were going through the same thing of not being their authentic selves? Because I'm sure there was some negativity, and maybe people lost faith in your leadership and things like that. And I don't know if it affected your confidence, because you're very confident to me, but how did you ensure that your voice was still heard and you were still that voice for others?
Well, the confidence, it's there most of the time. But when you get criticism, it's difficult. You have to be extremely resilient to keep going. And there would be times when I didn't have that energy, and I would be quiet about something, and I wouldn't have my voice heard. And that did happen. And the criticism, particularly when I did come out about my sexuality when I was the CEO of Lloyd's of London, there were many negative views expressed, some directly to me, some anonymously, but some people write me letters from across the world telling me I didn't deserve, or some of them I didn't deserve to be on the planet, never mind be in the role as the CEO of Lloyd's. So there was a lot. Wow. And my personal coping mechanism was to destroy most of that. In fact, now I have a slight regret, because I think actually if I'd kept all those nasty emails, letters that were written, anonymous or otherwise, I would have now the strength to probably go through them. Maybe I'll write a book one day, and I can have all of this stuff. I actually deleted it because it was my coping mechanism. I thought, I can't listen. If I listen to all of this criticism, I'm not going to move forward. So that does absolutely happen, even when you're right at the top of the organization. And I had my own coping mechanism. The other thing that can happen when you get more senior is you actually lose touch a little bit with what's going on throughout the entire organization. And quite honestly, then I would have conversations with people. I had reverse mentors. I had lots of skip level lunch engagements, informal chats and discussions with people, hoping that they would really open up to me and tell me what it was really like. still? Were there still sexist comments? Were people still being racist? Were they still being homophobic?
Wow.
I wanted to hear this, because the higher you up you get, the less you're kind of shielded from it a lot of the time. They might be talking about you, but it doesn't really reach your level. So you can lose touch with what's going on. So I made it a point of hearing what was going on and engaging with lots of groups. That tended to often mean a younger generation, because they, they're not yet middle managers or whatever. They're not so fearful about speaking out to the CEO. But I learned a lot, and therefore we made all sorts of things happen. And I just by having chats with some of the resource groups, I would hear things that were going on in the organization that shocked me. I remember we had a cultural awareness day, and we asked, or the group who was organizing it asked people to come in their clothes that reminded them of their home or took them back to their heritage, whatever it was. Just come with something, anything. And we had a lot of Indian women turning up in these most beautiful saris, gorgeous colors. And I remember saying to one of these women, I said, "That's so beautiful." I just innocently said, I said, "Do you ever wear this to work?" And she looked at me and she said, "No." She said, "There's such a strict dress code here. You can't wear a sari." And I sort of said, "Is there?" Because as the CEO, I didn't even really know about it. It's not something that had registered. But through having a conversation and just one comment, I realized there was such a strict dress code. We had to go and address the dress code and make it more open and accepting.
Wow.
And these are the things. This is why it's such a tough subject. You can't just get it right. There's no textbook. There's no guidelines that you can just read and implement. This is a tough one. Things have built up, maybe centuries in the case of Lloyd's, but maybe decades in the case of other organizations. We've got to try and unpick some of the bad things that were done, that at the time, a certain group decided it, and that was what they put in because they thought that was the right thing to do. Often it's not the right thing anymore. And so we've got to have just these conversations. And that's how I sort of kept in touch and would listen to people who would speak openly to me, and then I would make changes because I was the CEO and I could. But I think there's employee resource groups are a really, really good way of getting a voice heard of some of the minorities.
That's really good. That's really good. And it's, as you stated, just rules that were made centuries ago or years ago. And it's, at the time, it was probably the majority who were making those type of rules. And now it's looking at certain policies, you may not think that they affect your current, work population, but they do, because now the industry is becoming so diverse, and you just never know what policy will affect who. So with that, how can the industry in general, because it's, as you were the CEO and, you were talking to people and getting to know them, and, that policy that you changed with the strict policy code, what can the industry do within their own personal or private organizations when it comes to different policies? Is it a waste of time to go through every single policy, or should they actually include those who work for them or underneath them to go through the policies one by one and see what is legit and what is not legit? What can they do to kind of start that change when it comes to policy making?
That to me is a 101, housekeeping 101. It is essential that organizations now review all of their policies and practices and involve all types of people to say, is it created appropriately for today? I'm semi-retired, right? Nearly 60 years old. I get asked sometimes by organizations, well, what should we do about our guidelines for women? What can we do? I say, don't ask me. I'm not the next generation. I'm not the people you need to speak to. I'm yesteryear's generation. I'm not, it's not applicable to me. Go and ask the people who it's applicable. Ask the younger generation or the group of people that you want to affect. Ask them and get their voice there. They know what they need at that time. And it can be different now. And in 5 years, it might be something else. So this is why it's got to be a continuous thing to think about the policies that we have. But there is more you can do as well. So we did that as a basic. I said, this is 101, and these all have to be fair and balanced. And I always am trying to go for that balance, that that equal approach so that one group doesn't feel that they're now being marginalized over someone else. So it's a constant challenge, right? Trying to get this balance right. But we did a lot of that. So using equal balanced words, taking gender out if possible, taking all those words out if possible, and making things for everyone. And it was very interesting when I introduced flexible working so that you didn't have to physically come. This was way before COVID. You didn't have to come to the office. You could work flexibly, providing you agreed it and it worked for your team. And I remember having a town hall, and I remember one of the men in the front, in the audience, he asked me a question. He said, Inga, well, how come this is okay for the women, but it doesn't seem to be okay for the men? And I said, but it applies to both. He said, yes, but the policy states this, but the culture isn't accepting yet for men to come and ask to be able to work flexibly. And again, so even though you change a policy to be balanced and equal, doesn't mean it will be, because that's how the culture is. And that's how people are either prepared to take on new things or not prepared to take on new things. So as I said, this really isn't easy. Communication is key to this. Communicate that you really mean it and really listen to people. So it's got to be absolutely two-way communication, and it's got to be constant. The other thing is, if someone is seen to be behaving inappropriately, take action. You have to absolutely take action. I remember being the CEO of Lloyd's of London. We did fire people for their racist behavior. We fired people because they were homophobic. We did that. It was not acceptable. And that's the only way that you can then really, because managers, we have all of this, we think we know everything. Actually, most of our employees are one step ahead of us. They know everything. They're all talking about everything. If you don't show that you're taking action on these inappropriate behaviors, your people will not believe that you mean it. You have to take action. And again, that will register and go deep, and they will say, they're doing the right thing. This is a place I want to work. And then they will be able to speak up more freely in the future. Yes. I'm amazed how when I'm on these boards now and we get reports on how many people speak up, it seems such a small proportion of the number of people working in an organization and the number of things that I think they should be speaking up on. But we've got to get over this. And the only way to show people it's okay is to say, if someone speaks to, whether it's HR or another manager, another colleague, co-worker, whoever it is, there's got to be some action and some repercussions, and not negative repercussions on the person who's reported something. Very important.
Definitely. And that leads me to my next question for you. Since being in the industry and all the great things you have done, when it comes to DEI, what is probably the number one major change that you have seen that you can, I guess you can say that you feel is leading the industry to be more equitable and inclusive? What's one major change you've seen?
Now, please don't think I am not being flippant or shallow about this statement. I really mean this. People are spending time and money on it. Now, we know for years, the LGBT community, they've talked about people rainbow washing and things like this, saying, they're just throwing money at it, doesn't mean anything. Never before have I seen the insurance sector globally really spend time and money on this topic. The consulting firms, the big consulting firms, are being consulted on this constantly. Small consulting firms have sprung up all over the place. The number of requests I get to speak to corporates, they want to know what can they do, how can they do it. They would not be spending all this time and money if they didn't want to make a difference. It doesn't mean it's going to happen quickly, but right. At least there is a commitment there. That to me is the biggest change, because I didn't see any of that happening before. The banks were doing it, I would have said, way ahead of the insurance community. And they weren't necessarily very successful, but they were starting to spend money. But the insurance community now is doing it, and they're allowing people time to focus on this topic. They realize they've got to do something. They realize that if they don't, they will not have sustainable businesses. Customers will choose to go elsewhere. We won't come up with the products for the new generation, for the new way of living and working and being. So companies have to do something. So I mean it, not necessarily a very emotional thing, but I do believe it's a critical change in the entire insurance sector.
That's good. With that change, personally, what does, with Pride Month coming up, what does Pride Month mean to you now that you are, well, you have been living your authentic self, but what does that mean to you? You know, you said the industry, you know, they're putting money into the topic of DEI, belonging, and actionable steps, but with Pride Month specifically, what does that mean to you?
Well, I think of it as a celebration, but of course it's not really the origins of it, you know.
Right.
But I do like to think of it as a celebration now, because people are using this as a way of getting people together to talk about subjects that might otherwise have been taboo.
Right.
And, you know, there might have been people, even still people today in the workplace, for religious reasons or whatever, that aren't very accepting of the LGBTQ plus community. But Pride is an opportunity to go and celebrate, but also to have some serious conversations and challenge beliefs and perceptions of people. And often when you do have certain celebrations going on, it can give the courage for other people who are hidden or perhaps unsure about their sexuality to actually start talking about it a bit openly. Maybe they'll actually join the LGBT ERG, if you've got one, as an ally, and then actually end up coming out because they just needed that safety and that sort of support of others. So I see Pride Month as that a real opportunity to, and for corporations to also group together, particularly when you've got some rights going backward. There are many countries in the world, some big established ones, where some of the rights of people feel as though they're going back in time, going back a few decades. We thought we were making progress, but sadly, and there are obviously some countries in the world, particularly for the LGBT community, where it's still illegal and all the rest of it. But there are also places in the world where we thought we'd made progress and we seem to be knocked back. But corporations, by coming together, they have a really important, powerful voice. And by connecting up and doing this together and saying to the powers that be, or the groups that are trying to take us backward, if you come as a concerted voice and you do this together, you can really have an impact. And that's, again, the power of what the corporations can do together during Pride Month.
That's good. That's definitely good. Using their voice and their power to have influence. That's really good. So, sake of time, this is my last question for you. You know, you've lived a phenomenal life, you know, even with the negativities and things of that nature, and you've had an awesome career. What is your life's motto? What keeps you going? What motto do you live by every day that just keeps this confidence and this motivation going for you?
In the 1980s, which is way before this sports company adopted this saying, I wrote this on I sort of drew it on a massive piece of paper and I had it in my bedroom, and it said, just do it. Now it has become a particular motto, but I had this way before they made it famous. And this was it, but I tell you why, and I didn't always live up to it, but it was my way of telling myself, just do it. Because sometimes I'd be lacking confidence. I didn't have the courage to do something or say it, and then I would dither about something. So I would often come back to this, just do it, Inga. And so that has been an encouragement for me when times have been really tough and I thought I can't carry on, you know, I would say, just do it.
Just do it. Just do it. We should all live by that. It's many sneakers as I have from Nike. I should start living by that. Thank you so much, Inga, for speaking with us today. Thank you, audience, for listening to the one and only Inga Beale. We hope that you learned a lot, and we really hope that you take the gems that Inga dropped and take them back to your organization so that at the end of the day, not only can the industry be more diverse and equitable, but we want this to be a world-changing event. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time for our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.